So this is the process for the painting of a squirrel mascot for a sorority. I started off with 3 different sketches, all in graphite, done in my sketchbook. And from there I put them all together in one file. And I then added value in Photoshop to get a sense of where darks and lights land. So for example, here's some differences between the different field the value would give. Then I created some color comps and I sent them to the client, and they picked this one, but they didn't want the original green background, so I changed it to a soft pastel. And these are my digital stages where I'm building up final decisions. And then I print it out, and then I wet mount it onto masonite board. And this now you're seeing are my oil painting stages. So I just took some pictures as I was working. This is one of my small brushes that I like to use for detail. I use either a white nylon or sable, usually 0, 000, 000, 1s, pretty tiny. So once I'm finished with all the groundwork, then I get into the super detailed work. When I get to this point, I have to, a lot of times, do the work for a few hours and then stop and let it dry. So it becomes a little bit of a time-consuming process because oil just takes a little bit longer to dry. So this is the final oil painting, or close to the final oil painting. And again, I keep going in with detail, and I just keep working away until I get what I'm looking for. Once it all dries, then I'll varnish it. I use Galkid, which is a Gamblin product. Once I put this on, it takes about a week to dry, sometimes less, sometimes more, depending on the humidity and the environmental conditions. And then once I have that dry, I either scan it in or I take a photo of it, because I need to digitize the original artwork. And when you bring that in, you have a lot of artifacts, as you saw just in the previous slide, that a lot of particles get picked up. The camera or the scanner will pick up the particles for whatever has laid within the varnish. So a lot of time is spent actually getting rid of that. And there are filters that I can use in Photoshop, but in general I have to go in with the healing spot brush, get rid of a lot of the particles with that. And then I take it into Corel Painter, as you see here, and I'll use a blending brush that I created that's really great for just pushing the medium around. It's very similar to using a traditional dry brush over top of wet paint. So as I do that, I go into the painting and I work a little bit with some detailing. So there's some things that I might have lost in the scan that might be powerful in person, but may not translate through scan or camera lens. So then I have to go in and recreate or strengthen what that was. In this case, it was the rim of the hat. So I use a lot of, I paint on a separate layer and then I erase away to make sure that I'm getting the proper ellipse or the proper feel of the ellipse for the hat. As you see, it's a little wonky here, so I have to work that out. So a lot of the touch-up ends up becoming strengthening a little bit more of the other areas in the painting. So I'll go in and I'll touch up some of the highlights and some of the shadows, make sure that it's as strong as it can be. A lot of times this digital print can end up being a print that I sell through my Etsy store or on my website. It's for reproduction, so if it's for a client, I will send it to the client. The sorority will get this, and then they will use it for different products in a product line on their sorority store. In addition, for my website and for social media, I need to make sure that it's a really clear and crisp final product. The timeline for each portion of this type of project really varies. The sketch stage usually lasts, I can probably figure things out within 8 hours to 15 hours. It just depends on, what the project calls for. In this case, the sorority pretty much knew that they wanted their particular founder, Helen Butterfield, or one of their particular founders, represented as their mascot, the squirrel. So it really kind of was laid out for me already. So I probably, for the initial sketches, probably took about, I would like to say, 6 to 8 hours on those. Then the value comps, usually I can get done pretty quickly. I would say a couple hours for those, a couple hours for the color comps. Once the color comps are sent out to the client, I then wait to receive feedback. Once I get the feedback, I make any necessary changes digitally first, and then I work on just making sure that I don't have any, I'm not going into that final oil painting with any questions, so figuring out digitally is actually more time savvy for me. So that process, of course, can take many hours or only a few hours. I would say I probably took about another 8 hours, maybe 5 to 8 hours on that process for this project. And then going into the wet mounting and the oil painting, the final execution, I would say, probably took about 30 to 40 hours. That does include the wet mounting process and the varnish process. When we get into the digital touch-ups, I probably took about 2 hours to get that done. The final original painting is 11 by 14, and the digital reproductions will be available on my Etsy store after May 2018.